Hey, hello there. Welcome to RecordMixRepeat.com. I'm Rusty Smith, and today we're going to talk about signal path and what it is, and the different kinds of signal path, and how to manage signal path. So, what is signal path? Signal path is simply a signal going from one place to another. Let's start with analog signal path. Typically, the original signal is a sound made by an instrument or a voice, okay? And it actuates in the air, or a string actuates a pickup on a guitar, and that's the original source. So that's an output. In all signal path, you have outputs, and those outputs go into inputs, okay? So there's all these different stages of a sound starting here, going into a device, coming out of that device, going into another device, coming out of that device, going into another device, okay? And these devices are different things. They're either a voice or an instrument, a microphone or a pickup. From there, it goes into either a microphone preamp or the input of an interface, okay? I've always looked at it as gozautas and gazentas. What goes out of here goes into here. What goes out to here goes into here. And so each gazenta, each input, is looking for a certain amplitude, okay? A microphone is looking for a certain level of natural signal to actuate the diaphragm, to get it to put out a proper amplitude to hit a mic preamp, which is looking for a proper amplitude from the microphone. Let's look at a microphone. We're going to take a microphone and we're going to record something, all right? Microphones are put in front of natural sound sources that are moving air. For most people who are new to digital audio workstations and they have a simple interface, most of the time they're going to be plugging a microphone right into that interface and adjusting the level right there. Most of these simple little interfaces will have pads on them. So if you have a dynamic mic in front of a loud amplifier, you might want to engage that pad right there so that the input of that microphone preamp is not being hit too hard. In other words, without the pad, you might be in a situation where the knob is turned down all the way and that microphone is still hitting that input of that preamp too hard without that pad engaged, and there's distortion being created right there at the input, and you've blown your recording right there and you haven't even hit record. So what about the output of instruments? Instrument level, a guitar. It's putting out a very high impedance, very small signal that's coming off of the pickups. And that output of that guitar really needs to be amped up a whole lot. So you do have on a lot of the digital audio workstation interfaces guitar jack, quarter-inch inputs, and what they are, they're very high impedance inputs looking for that tiny signal. Of course, just like the microphone, you've got a knob to turn up and you've got a meter to read to where it gets up in the right area, and you go, okay, that's the right level, and you can record either that guitar or that bass guitar. Regardless, it's a high impedance signal, and it's usually a quarter-inch tip sleeve connector. So the third kind of output is line level output. Now, line level comes out of typically out of modeling things like Line 6 Pod Pros or Line 6 Helix foot pedal controllers. Fender has Tone Master amps now that have a line level out on the back, so you don't have to even be coming out of the speaker. You can come out of the line level out of the Tone Master and go straight into the line level in of your digital audio workstation interface. Regardless, they use a connector that is on the interface input. Typically, it's a tip ring sleeve quarter-inch. See, you got a tip, a ring, and a sleeve. You got 1, 2, 3. That's the tip, that's the ring, that's the sleeve. So that's 3 connectors. Most of the times it's XLR on the output of the modeling unit itself. So a lot of the time you have to go from an XLR female to a male TRS, tip ring sleeve, to get to the line input on a digital audio workstation. So the typical signal paths in front of an audio interface are a microphone plugged into the microphone input of the audio interface, an electric guitar plugged into the high impedance input of an audio interface, or an electric guitar that's plugged into an amplifier modeling device like a Line 6 Pod Pro, and then the line level out of that Pod Pro is plugged into the line level of the audio interface. So those are the three basic types to get from the analog world into the interface, which then converts all that analog signal into digital data. Your audio interface also has outputs. Now these outputs are typically for your speakers and your headphones. The speaker outputs are typically 1/4-inch tip ring sleeve connectors that you go out of the interface right into your speakers. And there's probably a knob on your interface as well to control the level of the speakers. There's also headphone outputs on your audio interface, so your speakers can be muted while you have a microphone and you're playing or singing or doing whatever you're doing, and you're capturing a sound with that microphone and you're wearing your headphones. So for most of you though, you're just going to have 2 inputs and 2 to 4 outputs, okay? And it's not going to be that crazy because, let's face it, you probably got a simple system, and it's not going to tie you up too much. And there's only a couple of things that you can trip over, and I'm going to have a whole thing about setting up an interface with different kinds of software in another video. All right, we've talked about how to get a signal into your audio interface and the signals that come out of your audio interface, going in with microphones or instruments, coming out of the interface and going to speakers or headphones. Now we're going to talk about how you manage the signal flow inside the audio interface for the software in your DAW. So the software we're going to be working with today is Studio One. There's Studio One right there. Okay, in Studio One, in the preferences, I have song setup. Now this right here, Universal Audio Thunderbolt, this is my audio interface, and this is Studio One's way to communicate and manage the inputs and outputs. So right here, we are looking at the inputs, and we see that this horizontal row right here, this is the actual physical connectors on my audio interface. And this right here, this vertical, is the labels, the inputs to the software of Studio One. So you see that 1 goes to 1, 2 goes to 2, 3 goes to 3, and you can choose stereo or mono. They have it broken down. And I know that if I patch into the 4th input, the mic or the line input on my interface, that it will show up on the 3rd and 4th inputs in the list in the software, and I'll show you. Here's a little piece of music here. This electric guitar I recorded in mono. That's a switch between mono and stereo, and here's the list. Okay, I can choose any one of the inputs, and I chose input 1 because I plugged the guitar into the high impedance input on my interface, okay? And when I recorded it, there's the guitar. There's the guitar right there soloed. And I've got it running through a plug-in, Helix plug-in. Here's what that looks like. So there's the signal path I have on my Helix. And if I disable that, we'll hear the guitar for what I really recorded, just straight out of the guitar. If you put the Helix in, it sounds a little more interesting. Fits into the track. Okay, so that is the way we're managing it. Now let's talk about the outputs. Now let's look at the outputs. Here it is. The main out hits monitor left and monitor right, which are patched into my speakers. Now I also have headphone outs, which I can choose. So I was talking about headphones and how I get to them. That is done in this software here, which is the Universal Audio, what they call the console. And right here, You see HP1 and HP2. I can choose mix, or I can choose a Q send, whatever. I tend to choose mix because I'm the only person listening to anything, and I don't have to worry about whether or not someone else is happy or not. So I can make the mix however I want it to make my headphones sound the way I want them to sound. And of course, when I am in my headphones, I've got the speakers muted. Here's the volume to hit my main speakers. Got to mute it. Listen, record on the headphones. If I'm using a microphone, because I don't want the microphone to feed back into the speakers, because that makes a heck of a nasty noise. So that's how you get headphones, how you control headphone sends on my interface. But this is a matrix, and you can make these choices as you go. This is a pretty complex interface. You probably don't have an interface that is that complex. All right, I've been talking about signal path outside of your interface, coming and going, to going into it and coming out of it. Now we're going to talk about the signal paths that exist inside the digital audio workstation. This is where all the fun begins. All devices used in any recording environment have an input and they have an output. I call them gazoutas and gazintas because it goes out of one device and goes into another device, goes out of that device and goes into another device. Once the analog audio has been converted to data, everything becomes virtual. We're in a make-believe recording studio, but it actually acts like a real recording studio. The instruments are virtual, yet they put out music. The recording gear is virtual, yet it actually processes the audio the same way as the real thing in the real world does. When I started out, as a recording engineer many years ago, back in the late 70s and early 80s, it feels like we were rubbing sticks together to make fire compared to what you can do today. We've really got a great situation today with digital audio workstations. So inside of a digital audio workstation, which I'm now going to start calling a DAW because it's easier to say, are two types of tracks. You have instrument tracks and you have audio tracks. The instrument tracks are recording MIDI data, which is essentially like sheet music. That data tells the instrument which notes to play, how long to play them, and how hard to play them. So here we have a typical instrument track. This is a drum track in a little tune that I recorded in Studio One, which is the DAW that I'm working in. And so if we play, we hear the drums performing. Okay, what we see here is the MIDI data on the track. And this, in this particular view, we can get a closer look at that. See that we have a piano simulated over here. This is what's called a piano scroll. And there's all the different sounds and samples available. This is what the sheet music, this is the MIDI data that we've put in. We get cymbals, kick, snare. When we hit play, we hear it. Now, what is playing? Well, it's an instrument. This is the MIDI data telling an instrument what to play. What is the instrument? It turns out I'm using this thing called Reason drum kits. And you see when I hit play, you can see all the different virtual drums being hit. Anyway, that's what an instrument track looks like. Then there's the audio tracks, which are taking the converted analog audio that's been converted to audio data in samples, and it's recording that actual audio, those samples on a track. So here we have a typical audio track. This is in the same song. This is Studio One. This is the bass guitar track right here. If I hit play, I've got it soloed. So we hear it making a little noise there. I've got a bunch of processing on it. What I actually recorded was the bass straight into my interface. Okay, and it sounds like this with no processing. So that's right off the bass guitar right there. If I put in the inserts, the virtual amplifier, if I put it in the room. But anyway, so here you have, this is the track itself. We can zoom into it and take a very close look at it. We can see it right down to the sample, right there. You can zoom in or you can zoom out, and of course you can edit these things. But anyway, this is a typical audio track. It has an input and an output. The input came from the interface. Input
Apparently I came in input 1 on this one, the day that I did it. And the output is here. It's going to the main. If you look at the mixer, you'll see it here.
You see the bass right here. I got it panned a little bit to the right because I wanted it to sound like a trio. And if I hit play, if I solo the bass, you see the bass guitar coming in here, going out the main output. You see the bass room right there. All right, so both of these tracks, instrument and audio tracks, they have an input and an output. We've talked about where the input comes from. Now, where does the output go? So all these tracks are blended together in the mixer, and the mixer is a visual representation of what audio mixing consoles look like in studios. They have faders at the bottom, they have EQ, they have sends, and they have routing capabilities for the input and the output of the channel. Okay, so these instrument and audio signals, they go to the mixer, and then the mixer spits it out to your speakers. But while it's in the mixer, it can go down several pathways to be processed by plugins, which are devices to change the sound. And these paths are inserts, buses, sends, and returns. And I'm going to show what each one of them does right now.
Inserts. What are inserts? Well, we see them up here. There, they say inserts right there. And not all channels have inserts, only some, the ones I've decided to use different things on. All right, here on this channel, this is the kick drum. It says drums, but it's actually the kick drum. The insert I'm using, this is a compressor. If I solo, you see it grabbing the kick drum, trying to make it a little punchier. Also trying to make the kick drum punchier. On this insert, I've got an equalizer. I'm putting some low end and some high end in it, and I'm taking out a little low mid. Take that equalizer out. It just sounds a little punchier with the EQ. All right, so we're going to talk about sends and returns right now. So here are some sends right here. And you'll notice that I'm hitting a thing called drum verb right here. I'm sending to the drum verb right here. So if I solo the snare, we hear that verb. If I take that verb out, we don't hear the verb. There we hear the verb. I want more of it, I turn the send up. I want less of it, I turn it down. So that is a send. Now sends and returns work together. So if we're sending, it's got to return. And we're sending to a place called drum verb. And we set up this effects return right here, and it's called drum verb, okay? And up here is the plug-in on an insert, and it is this nice large hall. And so if we solo the snare and I hit it, you see it coming in. And if I turn that send up, you see it get hit harder. And it gets a little higher. I can make it crazy loud. See? Or we put it down in a more reasonable place. There we go. So that is a send and a return. A send, you can have multiple channels, multiple signals hitting. Here's all the drums. So multiple channels are going out this send, and they're all coming here into this effects return, which is hitting this reverb unit. And this is the volume of it here on this return. I can lower that. That's a send and a return. All right, now we're going to talk about buses. What is a bus? A bus, it's kind of like a send. However, what it allows us to do is take several channels in the mixer. The kick, the snare, all these different elements of the drums are heading out to a thing called drum bus. This is the output here, and it's showing up right here. And why am I doing that? Well, for a couple of reasons. Main reason is I'm wanting to have the drums show up on this one fader here, on this one bus, so I can send it to the mains, which will go to the speakers. And the main reason I want to do it is because an insert I have here on that bus is this wonderful compressor here that I'm squashing the drums. I'm doing what's called parallel compression. There's a mix here. So you see the compression kicking down, okay? And it's making the drums just punchier, essentially. So if I solo the drums, if I turn that off, they don't sound quite as mean. Here with them on. They just sound a little bit punchier this way. That's the idea of what you do with a bus. It's similar to a send, yet it's different.
So I hope this explanation of signal paths helps you understand your interface and your DAW a little bit better and take some of the confusion out and some of the mystery out. Only thing we're trying to do here is get from one place to another at the right amplitude, and along the way modify the sound here and there a little bit to get what we're hearing in our head. That's all there is to it. Thanks for watching. Tune back in.